A blizzard howled across Aspen Creek, Colorado, swallowing the mountain town in swirling white. The wind slammed against the frosted windows of a lonely roadside diner, carrying with it the wild, unbroken voice of winter. From inside, laughter drifted beneath the battered country radio, muffled by thick glass and the growing drifts. No one noticed the brown Mustang standing outside, her silhouette trembling beneath the diner's neon sign, a creature of another world lost at the edges of warmth and light. Dakota's mane was stiff with ice, her sides slicked with freezing sweat. She shifted from hoof to hoof in the slush, leaving behind desperate prints that told a story only the wind could read. Her nostrils flared as she gazed through the windows, catching the scent of hot bread and bacon. Hunger twisted inside her, sharper than the cold biting at her skin. When the door swung open, a burst of warmth and human noise rushed out. A man in an apron tossed a bucket of water at her, shouting, "Get out of here!" Water splashed across Dakota's legs, stinging like needles. She recoiled but didn't run. Her eyes, wide and wild, lingered on the glowing door, haunted by memory and hope. Why would a proud Mustang stand trembling alone at the threshold of human civilization, risking everything for scraps? The question lingered in the air, carried by the storm. Inside the diner, folks barely spared her a glance. Some whispered, annoyed, others peered curiously at the sight. But one man, Jake Morgan, sat in his weathered pickup, engine ticking cool beneath the falling snow. His eyes tracked the Mustang's every movement. Jake was a widower, a man who had lived through winters harsher than most, his face weathered by grief and sun. That night, something in Dakota's eyes gripped him, something he hadn't seen since his wife passed. A flicker of pain, yes, but also stubbornness. The way she stood, refusing to be chased away, reminded him of his late wife, Emily. How she used to bring home strays, how her heart was never afraid of what was wounded. A memory cut through Jake's chest like a hot knife. Emily kneeling in the barn, coaxing a wild kitten to take food from her hand, whispering that everything broken deserved a second chance. The ache of that absence never left, but tonight, as he watched Dakota shiver in the storm, Jake felt something shift, a call to action, quiet but undeniable. Jake stepped from his truck into the icy night. The cold slapped his face, breath coming out in ghostly puffs. He didn't move fast, no sudden motions. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single sugar cube he always kept for horses on the road, and walked with the patience only grief can teach. The Mustang watched him, hooves sliding, nostrils quivering. "Easy, girl," Jake said, voice rough but soft at the edges. He ignored the angry shouts from inside. "Leave that stray alone, Jake," and instead knelt down, palm outstretched. The storm raged, snow swirling around them in an intimate, silent world. Dakota took a step, then another, hunger and fear warring inside her. She paused, eyes flicking to the door, ready to bolt, but the sugar scent pulled her closer. From inside, a child pressed her hand to the window, meeting Dakota's gaze through the glass. For a moment, it was just them, the wild and the innocent, bound by unspoken understanding. The world faded, the storm hushed. Dakota's ears flicked forward. Jake risked his reputation as a sensible rancher that night. People would talk. He could already hear the whispers. Morgan's lost his mind. But that didn't matter. All that mattered was the trembling Mustang in front of him, desperate but refusing to surrender. Just as Dakota's nose touched the sugar, the diner owner burst outside, boots crunching in the ice. "Jake, you planning to sleep out here with that stray? I'm calling animal control if she isn't gone in 5 minutes. Jake didn't flinch. He pointed at Dakota's halter, frayed but unmistakable, a sign she once belonged to someone. "She's not a stray, Larkin. She's lost." A hush fell over the small crowd that had gathered by the windows. The child inside mouthed something, her breath fogging up the glass. Dakota froze, caught between worlds. Jake glanced back at the owner, resolve firm. "She's coming with me." For a long heartbeat, no one moved. Then a waitress, her name was Carla, kind but tired, appeared with an old moth-eaten horse blanket. "If you're really set on it, Jake, she'll freeze if she stays out much longer," she said quietly, passing the blanket to him. Something in the gesture, a little hope, a crack in the cynicism, warmed the air between them. Jake draped the blanket over Dakota's shivering body. She didn't fight, not this time. As he guided her gently toward the barn behind the diner, the storm seemed to lose a bit of its fury. Whispers trailed after them, curiosity, skepticism, fear, but also something else. The sense that tonight, something in Aspen Creek was shifting. Inside the barn, lantern light flickered on straw and shadow. Jake brushed the ice from Dakota's coat, slow and steady, hands remembering what it was like to care for something other than his own sorrow. The silence between them was heavy, but not lonely. In Dakota's dark eyes, Jake saw his own pain mirrored back, a longing for shelter, for one more chance at hope. Outside, the wind howled on, but in the glow of the barn, a wild Mustang and a wounded man took the first tentative steps towards something new. Neither knew if they could trust again. But as Dakota lowered her head, finally allowing Jake's touch, the night offered a fragile promise. Sometimes rescue is a two-way street. Jake Morgan stood in the faint glow of the barn, steam curling from Dakota's flanks, his breath hanging like small ghosts in the cold. The blizzard raged on, but here, inside the rough wooden walls, time seemed suspended. Jake's hands trembled, not from the chill, but from the weight of memory and the silent responsibility now pressed on his shoulders. He looked down at Dakota, draped in the faded blanket, her legs still unsteady, eyes fixed on him with the cautious hope of something that has known too much pain. But peace is always temporary in a place like Aspen Creek. From the diner, word spread fast. A wild Mustang had wandered right into the heart of town, and a rancher, half mad from grief, was trying to save her. By morning, curiosity drew people to the frosted windows. The air buzzed with whispers and judgment. Jake could feel their eyes on him before he even stepped outside. As the sky paled to gray, Jake led Dakota from the barn, keeping a gentle grip on her lead rope. His boots crunched on the ice-crusted path. Dakota shied, nostrils wide, muscles bunching at every shout or sudden movement from the growing crowd. Children stared, some pointing, others tugging at their parents' sleeves. The wind tugged at Jake's hat, stinging his face, but he pressed on, Dakota's trust hanging by a thread. "Careful, Jake," called a voice from the diner porch. "She'll kick your head off." Jake just nodded, moving slow, murmuring to Dakota, "You're okay, girl. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Not while I'm here." He stopped near the edge of the diner lot. Most folks kept their distance, uncertain whether the wild Mustang was a miracle or a menace, but a few, emboldened by company, drifted closer. The diner's owner, Mr. Larkin, strode out, arms crossed, scowl as cold as the wind. "You planning to keep her, Morgan, or just making a spectacle?" he barked, his voice slicing through the morning air. Jake shook his head, firm but quiet. "She's lost, not wild. Look at her halter. She belonged to someone. She's scared and hungry." Larkin wasn't moved. "She's trouble. The last thing this town needs is a stray horse scaring folks or getting loose on the road. Animal control is on their way." Jake's jaw clenched. He looked at Dakota, then back at the gathering crowd. "She survived something bad. I'm not letting her freeze, not while I can help." The tension crackled, but then a small hand pressed against the glass from inside the diner. It was the little girl from the night before, her eyes locked on Dakota's. She didn't say a word, just stared. Something pure and ancient in her gaze. Dakota stilled, the chaos fading, her focus narrowing on that connection. Suddenly, a truck rumbled into the lot. Out stepped Sheriff Carter, boots heavy, badge glinting in the wan light. He took in the scene, a rancher, a Mustang, half the town lined up to watch. "What's going on here, folks?" he asked, voice deep but calm. Larkin wasted no time. "That horse is a danger, Carter. Jake here's got no right." But Carter lifted a hand to silence him, then looked to Jake. "You got this under control, Morgan?" Jake nodded, standing a little taller. "I do. Just giving her shelter till we figure out where she belongs." The sheriff studied Dakota, noticing the frayed halter and the wildness still thrumming beneath her calm. "She's spooked?" he asked. Jake shook his head. "Just cold and scared. She's not hurting anyone." From the crowd, a waitress, Carla, stepped forward, clutching a battered old horse blanket. She looked at Jake, then at Dakota. "She'll need something better than that to get through another night." She offered the blanket. Jake nodded his thanks, draping it over Dakota's back. For a moment a hush fell over the crowd, a flicker of kindness breaking through the suspicion. But suspicion isn't easily defeated. "Who's gonna pay if she breaks a fence or causes a wreck?" someone called out. "I will," Jake answered, voice steady. "She's my responsibility now." A murmur swept through the group, some annoyed, others quietly impressed. Then Mr. Larkin tried again, louder this time. "We can't have wild animals running loose, Jake. Not after what happened last year." The unspoken memory of a runaway colt and a nasty accident hung in the air, sour and unresolved. Jake squared his shoulders, feeling the old wounds in the community as sharp as the ones Dakota wore on her flank. He faced them, not with anger, but with something steadier. "She's not wild. She's lost. Look closer." As if on cue, Carla noticed a faded brand beneath the frost on Dakota's side. She stepped closer, brushing away the snow. "Wait. This is the Thompson brand, isn't it?" The name sent a ripple through the crowd. The Thompsons' ranch, burned down 2 winters ago, had been famous for its Mustangs. No one had seen their horses since the fire. A stunned hush spread. "That herd scattered to the mountains," someone whispered. "They said none of the Mustangs survived." Jake's throat tightened. "She did. She's proof." From inside the diner, the little girl opened the door and slipped outside, her mother hurrying after. She stopped a few feet from Dakota, eyes shining with something more than curiosity, maybe hope. Without a word, she reached out, palm up. Dakota's ears flicked. Slowly, cautiously, she stretched her neck and nuzzled the girl's hand, breath fogging the air between them. No one spoke. In that fragile silence, Jake realized what he'd risked. His standing, his peace, his pride. But seeing Dakota's head lowered, trust blooming between wild heart and child's hand, he knew it was worth every uncertain glance. A few townsfolk softened. Carla smiled, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. "Well, looks like you've got a friend, Jake. Might be this town needs a little more kindness, not less." Jake managed a tired, grateful smile. As he led Dakota back toward the barn, the wind seemed a little less bitter, the world inside Aspen Creek just a shade warmer. But he knew the real test was just beginning. Would the town stand by him, or would Dakota's fate be left to chance? Inside, as Jake unbuckled Dakota's halter and whispered encouragement, hope flickered in both man and Mustang. This was more than a rescue. It was the first step in a battle for trust, belonging, and the right to choose kindness over fear. The storm lingered through the morning, relentless in its assault on Aspen Creek. Snow blanketed every fence post and telephone wire, smoothing sharp edges into silent, ghostly shapes. Jake Morgan moved through the drifts with Dakota at his side, both of them shadows slipping behind the old diner toward the barn. Townsfolk, tired from the night's drama, drifted home with their opinions, leaving the street and the story behind, for now. Inside the barn, warmth clung to the walls, faint but real. Straw rustled underfoot, lantern light tossing golden reflections across Dakota's trembling frame. She pressed close to the wood, nostrils wide, still alert for the snap of a branch or the echo of a threat. Jake gently guided her to a corner stall. "Easy now, girl," he whispered, voice rough from the cold and something deeper. He latched the gate softly, making sure not to startle her. The world outside faded, storm, gossip, fear, leaving only the hush of horses, the creak of wood, and the heartbeat thud of 2 survivors trying to trust again. Jake shook off his coat and fetched a curry brush from an old tack box. He worked the ice from Dakota's mane and shoulders, every stroke slow and deliberate. "I know you've been through hell," he muttered, brushing at a tangle, "but you made it. You're here." Dakota shuddered but didn't bolt. She let her weight lean ever so slightly into his hand, a gesture so small it nearly broke Jake's heart. In the quiet, Jake felt the grief of the last year press down on him. The barn was filled with memories. Emily's laughter, the soft words she used to calm skittish horses, the warmth that had vanished with her. The ache of her loss had hollowed him out, made him withdraw even from the animals he once loved. Now, standing beside Dakota, he realized he'd been as lost as any wild Mustang in a blizzard. He remembered the long hospital nights, Emily's hand in his, her whisper, "Promise me, Jake, don't close yourself off. The world is still full of broken things that need you." Her words, like a lifeline, pulled him through one more lonely night. A soft footstep at the barn door broke the reverie. Carla, the waitress, entered with a mug of coffee and a flashlight. "Thought you might need this," she said, voice gentle as she handed the mug to Jake. She watched Dakota for a moment, her brow furrowed. "She's got scars. Real ones, not just from the cold." Jake nodded, feeling the weight of that truth. "Yeah. She's seen some rough times, like she's got her own ghosts." Carla stepped forward, reaching out with cautious fingers. "Mind if I—" Jake shook his head. Carla stroked Dakota's neck, murmuring softly. Suddenly, her hand paused at Dakota's flank. "Wait, look at this." She brushed aside the matted hair, revealing a faded brand, old but unmistakable. "Thompson Ranch," she breathed, awe mixing with sorrow. "After the fire, everyone thought all their Mustangs were dead or scattered." Jake traced the brand with his thumb. "She's a survivor. I guess that makes two of us." The moment held, a trio of wounded souls together in the lamplight. Jake got to work, mixing oats and molasses into a battered feed bucket, then sliding it into the stall. Dakota eyed it, then Jake, then the bucket again. She took a cautious step, then another, before dipping her muzzle in, nostrils flaring at the sweetness. The simple act of eating, so normal, so necessary, felt like a miracle. Carla smiled, her eyes shining. "You're good with her, Jake." He shrugged, a little embarrassed. Emily was the real whisperer. "I just try to listen." As Carla left, she pressed a carrot into Jake's palm. "For later," she winked and disappeared into the snow. Alone again, Jake sat on a bale of straw, watching Dakota eat. He spoke softly, more to himself than to her. "Storm will blow over soon. You're safe here, I promise." He wanted to believe it, for both of them. Night deepened. The barn glowed golden, and the storm's roar became background noise. Jake reached for his thermos and an old book of town records he'd brought from his truck. Emily's habit, searching for histories and lost stories. He flipped through brittle pages, stopping at the section on the Thompsons, famous for their Mustangs, their kindness, their stubbornness. There, in faded ink, were notes about a foal with a wild streak, a filly they called Dakota, who survived anything nature threw her way. Jake glanced at the Mustang, seeing her anew. "You've been a fighter your whole life, huh?" he whispered, pride and sorrow tangled together. A sharp knock interrupted. Mrs. Avery, his elderly neighbor, entered with a basket of carrots and a gentle smile. "Thought your guest might be hungry," she said, eyes twinkling as she looked at Dakota. "Poor thing, she's got that lost look." "Reminds me of you, Jake." She handed him the carrots, then brushed Dakota's cheek with a practiced hand. There. You're safe now." For the first time, Dakota's ears flicked forward, her muscles relaxing under the touch. Jake wrapped the blanket tighter around Dakota, and as he did, she lowered her head, her dark eyes meeting his with something like gratitude. The tremor in Jake's hand surprised him, a sign that caring for this wounded creature was pulling him back into life, one small act at a time. That night, as the snow fell and the world grew still, the man and the Mustang shared the fragile shelter of the barn. Healing was not sudden nor easy, but in the hush of straw and lantern light, hope took root, a wild, stubborn thing determined to weather the storm. The storm dragged on, muffling Aspen Creek beneath a thick white quilt. By the time night surrendered to morning, the town had settled into a strange hush. Power lines sagged with ice, drifts reached the porch steps, and all the world seemed to move slower, as if time itself was giving everyone a reason to pause. In the barn behind the old diner, Jake Morgan and Dakota found themselves in a fragile sanctuary, a place suspended between the violence of the blizzard and the harsh judgments waiting outside. Jake slept lightly, boots still on, blanket pulled over his shoulders. Every few hours he'd stir, rising from his makeshift bed to check on Dakota. Sometimes she stood, nostrils flaring at phantom threats, muscles tight and alert. Other times she rested, her head bowed, breath misting in the golden haze from the lantern. Jake moved quietly, offering comfort with low, steady words. "Easy, girl. No one's gonna hurt you, not while you're here." It wasn't just a promise for her. It was a promise to himself, too. By mid-morning, the worst of the storm had passed. The barn was cocooned in a deep silence, interrupted only by the soft nickers of the horses and the gentle patter of melting snow sliding off the roof. Jake took a seat on an old wooden crate, a mug of coffee warming his hands. Next to him sat a stack of weathered ledgers and scrapbooks, town records, family histories, all remnants of Emily's curiosity and her hunger for lost stories. He turned the brittle pages, searching for traces of the Thompson Ranch, of their legendary Mustangs and the fire that ended it all. The story unfurled in black and white photographs and faded newsprint. A proud herd, wild and loyal. A family admired for their kindness and resilience. A catastrophe that scattered both people and animals to the wind. There, in a grainy picture, Jake saw what could only be Dakota, smaller than, bright-eyed, framed by mountains and freedom. His heart ached. He remembered the early days with Emily, teaching her to ride. The two of them stumbling through laughter and awkwardness, her stubbornness matching his own, until finally she mastered the rhythm of horse and rider. In those moments, the barn was filled with the music of hooves, the ring of her laughter, the sunlight in her hair. Now the silence pressed in, heavy as a memory he couldn't shake. He set the book aside and crossed to Dakota, who stood quietly in her stall. He stroked her neck, fingers tracing the scars beneath her coat. "You and me. We both lost our herds," he said softly. "Maybe it's time we stopped running." Dakota's ear flicked, and she nudged his arm, her eyes finally meeting his with a calmness that had been missing the night before. The barn door creaked open. In stepped Mrs. Avery, cheeks flushed from the cold, arms loaded with a bag of carrots and a thermos of hot tea. "Morning, Jake. Figured you two could use some company," she said, her voice as gentle as the dawn. She approached Dakota with a practiced air, breaking the carrot into chunks and offering it from her palm. Dakota hesitated, then took the treat, her ears pricking forward for the first time since her arrival. "You're working magic, Mrs. Avery," Jake said, managing a tired smile. "Nonsense," the old woman replied. "It's patience, not magic. Animals know when someone's heart is hurting. They're drawn to it." She cast him a knowing look. "You're doing good, Jake. Emily would be proud." That struck deeper than she knew. Jake blinked back the ache in his chest and busied himself filling water buckets, hiding his emotions in the motions of care. Mrs. Avery settled on a bale of straw, pouring 2 cups of tea. "Tell me what you found," she prompted, gesturing to the ledgers. Together they sifted through the stories of Aspen Creek, the losses, the small victories, the names and brands of horses long gone. As the day stretched on, the barn grew cozier. Jake read aloud stories of the Thompsons and their prized Mustangs, his voice softening with each tale. Dakota, lulled by the cadence, edged closer, her eyes closing in contentment. The storm's grip loosened, replaced by something warmer, a sense of belonging that neither horse nor man had felt in a long time. At dusk, Carla returned with a sack of oats and a shy smile. "Town's buzzing," she said, glancing at Dakota. "Some folks say you're crazy, Jake. Others think maybe you're the only one making sense." She handed Jake the sack and stroked Dakota's forehead. "The little girl from the diner keeps asking if she can visit. Says the Mustang looked right at her heart." Jake grinned, the tension in his shoulders easing for the first time in days. Maybe she did. Maybe she saw something worth saving. Later, when the world was painted blue by twilight and the air smelled faintly of thawing snow, Jake sat with Dakota, humming an old song Emily used to love. The horse stood close, her breathing calm and steady. He closed his eyes, letting the melody fill the empty spaces left by grief. "Storm's over, girl," he murmured. "We made it." He didn't say it out loud, but both of them knew. The real storm, the loneliness, the aching emptiness, was only just beginning to break. As he rose to leave, Dakota pressed her weight against him, a quiet benediction. For the first time since the fire, she trusted a human enough to lean in, to ask for closeness. Jake stroked her mane, his heart fuller than it had been in years. The barn, once a place of shadows and silence, now held the first fragile threads of hope. In the morning there would be new challenges, town gossip, hard choices, wounds that hadn't yet healed. But for one night, man and Mustang shared the simple gift of connection, and it was enough. By dawn, the news of Dakota, the miracle Mustang, had spread like wildfire through Aspen Creek. It seemed every corner of the town buzzed with rumors and opinions, the story growing with each retelling. The local feed store, usually a place for idle small talk and the clatter of scoops and bins, became a stage for heated debates. Some folks marveled at the wild horse's survival, claiming she brought good luck after such a brutal winter. Others, still haunted by past losses, muttered about danger and disorder, their fear just a half step behind their skepticism. At the schoolhouse, a cluster of children crowded around the playground fence, eyes wide, voices bright with hope and adventure. "I saw her. She's beautiful," one insisted, her mittened hands gesturing wildly. "Do you think she has magic?" another whispered, the tale already bending toward legend. Their teacher, Mrs. Porter, listened with a faint, bittersweet smile. She remembered the Thompsons' herd before the fire, the days when Mustangs roamed the hills and Aspen Creek felt a little more alive. Jake felt the shifting tides as soon as he stepped into the general store for supplies. Conversations hushed as he entered, the old bell jangling above the door. Mr. Hendricks, the owner, raised an eyebrow as Jake approached the counter, his tone caught somewhere between suspicion and admiration. "You really keeping that Mustang, Jake? Or just waiting for animal control to show up?" Jake straightened, hand steady on the worn wood. "She's not a stray, Hendricks. She belonged to the Thompsons. She deserves a chance, same as any of us." A few in line grumbled, but others nodded, the truth of Jake's words impossible to deny. The town was full of people who'd lost things, ranches, family, the old way of life. Maybe Dakota's story was a mirror, reflecting both the pain of what had vanished and the stubborn hope of what could remain. But not everyone was convinced. That evening, the town called an emergency meeting at the church hall. The place was packed. Ranchers, shopkeepers, parents, and kids squeezed onto the pews, their breath clouding in the chilly air. The mayor, a heavy-set man with a careful way of speaking, stood at the front. "We're here to talk about the Mustang," he began, his words echoing off the high ceiling. Jake rose to speak, his heart pounding in his chest. He told Dakota's story, how she'd braved the storm, how she'd lost her herd and her home. He spoke of finding the fated brand, proof she once belonged in Aspen Creek. "She's not a threat," he insisted, voice cracking with emotion. "She's a survivor. We all are." Old wounds surfaced as the discussion grew heated. Ranchers complained of lost cattle and broken fences, the cost of survival in a world that didn't care about sentiment. Some blamed Jake for stirring up trouble, others defended him. In one corner, Mrs. Avery stood and raised her voice, rare steel sharpening her words. "I saw Dakota the night of the fire. She tried to run back, tried to save her foal. I saw her in the flames. Don't you dare call her a threat. She's braver than half the people in this room." The room stilled. Jake met Mrs. Avery's eyes, gratitude blooming between them. Her memory, the image of Dakota risking everything to save her own, moved the conversation to a different place, not just about fear, but about courage and sacrifice. That night, as the debate stretched into exhaustion, Jake invited Dr. Clara Reese, the local veterinarian, to examine Dakota. Clara, tough and soft-spoken, arrived at the barn with a worn bag and steady hands. She moved with quiet authority, checking Dakota's legs, brushing her mane, feeling along her sides for hidden injuries. Jake watched, anxious, as Clara murmured to the Mustang. "She's lucky to be alive," Clara said finally. "She's got old burns on her haunches, a couple of cuts that need tending, but she's strong." Whatever kept her going out there, it's nothing short of a miracle. A small crowd gathered at the barn doors, peering in as Clara worked. Carla arrived with a basket of apples, coaxing Dakota with gentle words. Even a few of the skeptics watched in silence, the scene shifting something inside them. Jake noticed the way the children clustered around the fence, eyes shining with hope. The mayor, Hands shoved deep in his pockets cleared his throat. "Well, Jake, seems you got yourself a town mascot." There was the ghost of a smile in his voice, but the question hung in the cold air. Would the town come together to help, or would fear win out? The answer came slowly, in small, stubborn gestures. A group of children started a jar at the school, collecting coins and crumpled bills for Dakota's feed. Carla rallied other waitresses to bring over old blankets and warm mash. Even Mr. Hendricks grudgingly added an extra bag of oats to Jake's order, muttering about soft hearts, but not raising the price. As Jake and Clara tended Dakota late into the night, the Mustang's strength seemed to grow. Her eyes, once shadowed and wary, now held a glint of trust, something fragile, but real. Jake brushed her mane, humming softly, feeling the barn fill with an energy he hadn't known in years. Outside, the town was still uncertain, still divided, but inside that barn, something had shifted. Hope, like the first green shoots beneath the snow, was quietly taking root. And as Dakota pressed her muzzle into Jake's palm, he knew they'd both found something worth fighting for. A place, a people, a second chance. The blizzard had melted into memory, and Aspen Creek shook off its shroud of ice as spring teased the edge of the valley. The snowbanks shrank, mud oozed in the pastures, and the morning sun threw golden beams across the battered roof of Jake's barn. Inside, the air was different, warmer, alive with hope. Dakota, the battered Mustang, had become a fixture now. She stood quietly in her stall, watching the world with eyes that had learned both fear and trust. Jake rose at dawn, stiff from another night spent in the barn. He yawned, stretched, and set to work with a patience that came from years of wrestling his own ghosts. Each movement was a small ritual, measuring oats, checking water, brushing Dakota's coat until her rich brown hide shone through the rough patches. He sang softly as he worked, half-remembered tunes Emily once favored. The barn, once hollow and cold, seemed to hum with a pulse again. Dr. Clara Reese arrived just as the sun climbed above the mountains. She set down her battered vet bag and gave Jake a nod. "She's looking better," Clara said, her gloved hands running gently along Dakota's legs. "No swelling. Wounds are healing clean. You've done good, Jake." Dakota flicked her ears, eyes calm for once. Clara paused, hand pressed to Dakota's side, searching for something beneath the surface. "Easy, girl," Jake murmured, stroking Dakota's mane as Clara checked the old burns and a nasty cut along her flank. It had festered in the first days, but now, thanks to careful tending, it was scabbing over, the flesh pink and new beneath the scar. Dakota stood motionless, body trembling just once as Clara dabbed medicine on her burns. The change was remarkable. A week ago, she'd have kicked at any hand that dared come close. Now, though wary, she allowed Clara's touch, even nuzzled Jake's shoulder when he whispered encouragement. The line between wild and tame was blurring, healing working both ways. Clara straightened and turned to Jake, a puzzled smile tugging at her lips. "She's gained weight, appetite strong, and, Jake, do you notice her belly?" Jake blinked, peering closer. Dakota's sides, once gaunt, now carried a gentle swell. Clara met Jake's gaze, the surprise in her eyes quickly warming to delight. "She's in foal, Jake. That's why she survived. She had more than herself to fight for." Jake let out a long, slow breath, the truth settling over him like sunrise. "All this time." He shook his head, awed by Dakota's will to live. "She's tougher than I ever gave her credit for." Clara grinned, patting Dakota's neck. "You've both been running on empty for a long time. Now you've got something to hope for." That afternoon, word about Dakota's condition spread through town. Children brought apples and carrots, giggling as Dakota took treats from their palms. Even some old skeptics wandered over, peering at the Mustang with cautious respect. Jake welcomed them, opening the barn doors wide. He wanted everyone to see the truth. Healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken, but about letting others in. He found himself talking to Dakota more, confiding worries he'd locked away since Emily died. "I keep thinking I'm not enough, you know, that if I open my heart again, it'll just hurt worse when something goes wrong." Dakota stood close, her quiet presence an answer better than words. Some evenings, Jake caught Carla leaning on the fence watching the Mustang graze in the setting sun. "Never seen you like this, Jake," she teased. "Barn's always full of folks these days. You thinking of opening a petting zoo?" Jake grinned, shaking his head. "Just trying to keep up with the times, I guess." But there was warmth in his voice, something old and gentle returning. As days passed, Jake and Dakota settled into a rhythm. He led her through the greening fields at dawn, marveling at the way she walked beside him now, not behind or ahead, but as a partner. They repaired broken fence rails together, Dakota sniffing the fresh wood, Jake steadying her with a touch when old fears bubbled up. Some nights he slept in the barn, the quiet broken only by Dakota's steady breathing and the muffled sounds of new life growing inside her. One morning, Mrs. Avery brought a stack of faded photographs, images of the Thompson herd, of a young foal that looked just like Dakota galloping wild through sunlit grass. "She's not just a survivor, Jake," Mrs. Avery said, pride glinting in her eyes. "She's a legacy." Jake ran a finger along the photographs, his heart swelling with a hope he thought he'd lost. "She'll never be just another horse to me. Not now." That evening, as the sun dipped low and shadows stretched across the fields, Jake leaned against Dakota's stall, humming the old lullaby Emily loved. Dakota nuzzled his shoulder, her trust as steady as the earth beneath them. He closed his eyes, letting her warmth chase away the last of the winter's chill. For the first time in years, Jake felt hope, solid, living hope, take root in his chest. In Dakota's presence, in her coming foal, he saw proof that broken things could heal, that even the wildest spirits could learn to trust again. The Mustang had saved herself, and in doing so, she'd saved him, too. Outside, the wind carried laughter from the distant town, the scent of new grass, and the promise of another day. In the barn, man and horse stood side by side, wounded but healing together, a quiet testament to the power of second chances. Spring deepened across Aspen Creek, painting the once frozen valley in shades of green and gold. With each passing day, the world outside Jake Morgan's ranch seemed to thaw a little more. The icicles dropped from eaves, creeks sang with meltwater, and the air was full of birdsong and new beginnings. Yet, inside Jake's barn and his heart, the most profound change of all came not from the seasons, but from the steady rhythm he and Dakota had found together. Their routine was simple, almost sacred. At sunrise, Jake would step out onto his porch, boots still damp from yesterday's dew, and call softly. Dakota would wicker back from the pasture, her brown coat glossy now, her belly full with new life. They walked together under the brightening sky, sometimes following the fence line, sometimes wandering down the rutted tracks that led to the creek. Jake talked more in those mornings than he had in years, telling Dakota about his dreams, his regrets, the memories of Emily that hovered in the corners of his mind. Dakota, ears forward, listened in her silent way, never judging, just steady as the earth. There were chores, of course, broken rails to mend, water troughs to clean, the endless little tasks that kept a ranch alive. But now, even the work felt lighter. Jake had started inviting neighbors and old friends to visit. They'd come with excuses at first, a borrowed tool, a question about feed, but soon they lingered, drawn by the peace that seemed to hang over Jake's place. Sometimes Carla would show up with extra pastries from the diner, balancing a tray in one hand and patting Dakota with the other. Sometimes Mrs. Avery came, bringing flowers to plant along the fence. Even kids from the school stopped by, eyes wide with wonder at the once wild Mustang now so gentle and approachable. And Jake, bit by bit, let the walls inside him lower. He found himself smiling at jokes, laughing at old stories, even joining in a game of horseshoes with the ranch hands one bright afternoon. The emptiness that had haunted him for so long was shrinking, filled now with laughter, the gentle scrape of Dakota's hooves, the warm press of community. Yet not everything was as peaceful as it seemed. Aspen Creek was a town with a long memory and more than a few old grudges. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in streaks of lavender and rose, Jake sat on his porch with Dakota at his side. He was brushing her mane, the two of them bathed in quiet, when a figure approached from the back gate. It was Bill Connors, an old rival. never outright hostile, but always watching from the shadows. Bill tipped his hat, nodding. "Evening, Jake. Heard you and your Mustang are the talk of the town." Jake grunted, not quite sure whether to expect trouble or just words. Bill knelt, picked up a handful of dust, and let it run through his fingers. "Strange things been happening, you know. Couple of folks lost calves last week, found the fence cut out by the south pasture." Jake stiffened. "What's that got to do with us?" Bill's eyes flickered to Dakota, suspicion in their depths. "Some folks reckon wild horses attract trouble. Bad luck, they say. You watch yourself, Morgan." With that, Bill melted back into the twilight, leaving behind the bitter aftertaste of old resentments and new worries. Jake tried to push the encounter from his mind, but the seed of unease had been planted. Later that night, after the barn was quiet, he paced the floor, whispering his fears to Dakota. "I don't want to believe it, girl, but some folks would rather blame you than look for the truth." He stroked her nose, searching for answers in her calm, dark eyes. Days went by. The ranch thrived, but Jake kept a closer watch. He started locking the gates, double-checking fences. One morning, a ranch hand named Tom found a piece of paper tucked beneath the barn door. A note, written in angry block letters, "Get rid of the Mustang or else." Jake's hands shook as he read it. He burned the note in the stove, but the threat lingered. That evening, he called a meeting with Carla, Mrs. Avery, and Tom, telling them what he'd found. "Someone's trying to scare us," Jake said, anger barely held in check. "But I'm not giving up on Dakota. Not now. Not ever." They all agreed to help keep watch, to spread word that Dakota was under their protection. "Let 'em come talk to me if they have a problem," Carla said, her eyes fierce. Mrs. Avery squeezed Jake's arm, her presence steady as ever. Despite the rising tension, Jake and Dakota held fast to their routine. On sleepless nights, Jake would slip into the barn, sitting in the straw and confessing his fears to Dakota. "I'm scared to love again," he admitted once, his voice barely a whisper. "Scared that if I let myself hope, I'll lose it all, just like before." Dakota nuzzled his shoulder, her breath warm against his cheek. In her, Jake found a comfort that words couldn't offer, a reminder that healing meant risking pain, and that trust was built not on promises, but on daily acts of courage. The ranch hand Tom stayed late, keeping an eye on the fences. One evening, he spotted movement along the tree line, a pair of figures, flashlights sweeping through the darkness. Jake loaded his old rifle and, with Tom and Dakota beside him, patrolled the edge of the property. They found nothing that night, just broken branches and hoof prints that weren't Dakota's. But the message was clear. Someone wanted Dakota gone, and they wouldn't give up easily. Still, each morning, Dakota waited by the gate, her faith in Jake unwavering. In the bond they shared, quiet, persistent, and real, Jake found the strength to keep fighting, to keep letting people in, and to keep believing that love was worth the risk. As the sun rose over Aspen Creek, man and Mustang faced the day together, ready for whatever darkness might come, together. Night dropped fast in Aspen Creek, throwing long, uneasy shadows over the ranch. Jake had spent the afternoon mending fences with Tom, each man keeping a wary eye on the darkening horizon. They hadn't spoken much about the threats, but the air was thick with worry. Dakota grazed nearby, every now and then lifting her head to scan the distance, ears pricked to every sound. As dusk deepened, the familiar peace that had settled on the ranch felt fragile. The wind rustled the cottonwoods along the creek. In the far distance, a coyote howled, its lonely cry curling through the night like a warning. Jake tossed an extra log on the fire, double-checked the barn doors, and made his usual round before heading inside. He paused at Dakota's stall, scratching her behind the ear. "Don't worry, girl. You're safe here," he murmured, but his own words tasted hollow. He barely slept. Sometime after midnight, a restless stirring woke him. Dakota's shrill whinny tore through the stillness, urgent and wild. Jake jolted upright, boots thudding against the floor as he ran outside into the bracing cold. The scene was chaos. Dakota reared at the gate, hooves striking the wood, mane flaring like a battle flag. Her eyes blazed with fear. Jake caught sight of shadowy figures darting near the lower pasture, flashlight beams jerking between the trees. A deep primal warning surged in Jake's chest. Someone was out there, up to no good. Tom appeared at his side, breathless and clutching a heavy flashlight. "I saw 'em too, Jake. 2, maybe 3. They're by the cattle pens." Before Jake could answer, Dakota bolted from her stall, breaking free of her rope with a powerful thrust. For a moment, Jake's heart nearly stopped. Then he realized she wasn't running away. Instead, she charged toward the back fence, nostrils flaring, ears pinned flat in fury. "Come on!" Jake shouted, grabbing Tom's sleeve and sprinting after Dakota. They crashed through the underbrush, brambles tearing at their jeans, boots slipping in the mud. The moon hung low, half hidden by clouds, throwing everything into sharp contrasts of black and silver. At the riverbank, Dakota stopped dead, pawing the ground. Beyond her, shadows moved, figures struggling to push calves across the swollen creek. The beams of their flashlights flickered, illuminating 2 men in mud-stained coats, ropes slung over their shoulders. Jake's blood ran hot. "Cattle thieves," he hissed. For weeks, people had whispered that Dakota brought trouble, blaming her for every lost animal, but the real culprits were right here, in the act. Dakota let out a piercing whinny, stamping and tossing her head. The thieves froze, startled by the wild, charging Mustang. Tom raised his light and called, "Drop those ropes! You're caught!" For a second it looked like the men would run, but Dakota lunged forward, blocking their escape, her powerful body forming a barrier between the thieves and the open field. One of the men tried to swing a rope at her, but she reared back, slamming her hooves dangerously close. The man stumbled, fell into the mud, and lost his grip on the struggling calf. Jake seized the chance. "Go get the sheriff!" he barked at Tom, who sprinted for the truck parked near the road. Jake advanced, fists clenched, heart hammering. "You picked the wrong night, fellas," he growled. The thieves panicked. One slipped and crashed into the icy creek, gasping and spluttering. The other, trapped by Dakota's fierce presence, threw up his hands. "We didn't mean no harm," he blurted, fear sharp in his voice. But Dakota would not be calmed. She snorted, muscles rippling, her wild spirit unleashed. Jake stepped between her and the men, hands out in a calming gesture. "Easy, girl. You did good. Let me handle it now." Flashing red and blue lights painted the trees as the sheriff's truck screeched down the lane, Tom waving him in. Within minutes, the men were in handcuffs, the stolen calves safe, and Dakota standing tall and proud beside Jake, sides heaving from adrenaline but eyes clear and bright. The sheriff, a big man with a gentle manner, surveyed the scene. "Heard rumors you had a wild Mustang causing trouble," he said, eyeing Dakota with new respect. "Looks to me like she just caught the real troublemakers." Jake let out a shaky laugh, relief and pride mingling in his chest. "She's a protector, Sheriff. Saved my herd, and maybe me too." The news traveled fast. By sunrise, Aspen Creek was buzzing. Folks who had doubted Dakota now gathered at Jake's ranch, eager to see the horse who'd outsmarted thieves and defended her new home. The children came first, bringing armfuls of apples and homemade thank-you cards. Carla arrived with coffee and pastries for the crowd, her pride in Jake and Dakota shining through her every word. Even Bill Connors showed up, hat in hand, muttering, "Guess I was wrong about her, Jake." As Jake led Dakota around the pasture, showing her off to the town, he felt a powerful surge of hope. For so long he'd lived on the outside, grieving, doubting, holding back. But now, standing beside this once-lost Mustang, Jake understood that real courage didn't mean never being afraid. It meant showing up anyway, fighting for what mattered, and trusting in the goodness that could still be found. As the last of the sun's rays melted into dusk, Dakota pressed her head into Jake's shoulder, a silent gesture of trust and kinship. She had come to Aspen Creek broken and hunted, a target of fear and suspicion. Now, because of her wild courage and Jake's unwavering belief, she stood at the very heart of the community, a survivor, a protector, a symbol of second chances. The night wind was cool on Jake's face as he leaned against the fence, Dakota at his side, the town around him. For the first time in years he felt whole, a man remade by trust, by loyalty, and by a Mustang's fierce and gentle heart. The next morning dawned bright and warm, as if the whole valley was waking up from a long, troubled sleep. For the first time since the winter's blizzard, Aspen Creek shimmered with color, spring flowers pushing up through the thawing earth, sunlight glancing off the church steeple, laughter drifting from open windows. News of Dakota's heroism traveled like wildfire, carried by excited children, coffee shop gossips, and even the morning radio. By midday, the entire town gathered for the annual spring celebration at the community center, a tradition meant to chase off the last ghosts of winter and welcome the season of new beginnings. This year, the event had a different energy, a sense of hope that ran deeper than usual, an awareness that Aspen Creek had come through something together. Jake felt the shift as soon as he led Dakota toward the community lawn, the Mustang's presence drawing a hush from the crowd. People parted to let them pass, faces lit with pride and gratitude. The mayor waited at the bandstand, a big man with a quick smile, waving for Jake and Dakota to join him up front. Jake wasn't one for speeches, but as he looked out at the crowd, neighbors, friends, even old rivals, he felt a new strength rise in him, something forged by hardship and healing. The mayor clapped him on the back and handed over the microphone. "Jake Morgan and Dakota have given us more than a story," he said, voice booming across the lawn. "They've reminded us what it means to look out for each other." Jake swallowed, clearing his throat. Dakota stood beside him, calm and dignified, her foal moving gently in her belly. Jake placed a steadying hand on her neck, then spoke, his voice quiet but certain. "I lost my wife a year ago," he began. "After she was gone, I stopped believing there was much left for me in this world. I closed up my ranch, closed up my heart. When Dakota came stumbling out of that blizzard, I saw myself in her, hurt, lost, just surviving." A hush fell as Jake continued. "I almost let fear make my decisions for me. But this horse, she wouldn't give up. No matter how cold it got, no matter how hungry or scared she was, she kept fighting. And when she finally let me help her, I realized that maybe I needed saving just as much as she did." He glanced at the children sitting cross-legged on the grass, eyes wide. It's easy to give up on things, on people, on hope. But sometimes, the ones who look wildest, the ones who seem most broken, are the ones who teach us how to start over. Dakota taught me that trust isn't given all at once, it's built, day by day. And courage doesn't mean you're never afraid, it means you show up anyway, for yourself and for others. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then swelling as people rose to their feet. Carla wiped her eyes, Mrs. Avery squeezed Jake's hand, and even Bill Connors cheered from the back, his usual gruffness replaced by a reluctant smile. As the festivities carried on, games, music, and food stands filling the air with joy, Dakota found herself surrounded by children. They reached out timid hands, stroking her soft nose, feeding her bits of apple, giggling at the warmth in her eyes. Even the most anxious kids seemed to relax in her presence, the Mustang's calm a quiet balm against all the old fears and suspicions. Parents watched in wonder, remembering how quickly fear could twist the heart, and how easily it could be unwound by a moment of gentleness. At one point, Mrs. Avery asked for everyone's attention. She stood at the front, holding a faded leather journal. "After the fire at the Thompson Ranch, I saved this from the ashes," she said, voice trembling. "It belonged to Sarah Thompson, the last of the old Mustang breeders. She wrote about a foal, wild, stubborn, impossible to break, but loyal to a fault. That foal was Dakota. And she wrote that the true worth of a Mustang isn't in how fast it runs or how well it jumps fences, but in the way it stands by you when all the rest have run off." She flipped open to a passage and read aloud, her voice catching on the words. "If you're lucky enough to win a Mustang's trust, you've found a friend for life, a soul as brave as any person, and a heart as wide as the prairie." A collective sigh rippled through the crowd. Jake blinked hard, fighting back tears. He realized in that moment that Dakota's story wasn't just his, or even Aspen Creek's. It was a story as old as the land, about loss, survival, and the unexpected ways healing can take root. After the ceremony, Jake and Dakota lingered beneath a big cottonwood, watching the celebration unfold. Jake knelt by Dakota's side as kids continued to flock around. One little boy, red-headed and shy, asked, "Does she remember her family?" Jake smiled, running a hand along Dakota's mane. "I think she does. and I think she's found a new one here. The core lesson of that day echoed in every conversation, every shared smile. Healing often comes from the broken places, from the people and animals who have known pain and chosen to trust again. It takes a whole town, a whole community, to help a wounded soul find their footing. Dakota wasn't just a survivor, she was a catalyst, turning suspicion into hope, division into connection. As the sun set over the foothills, painting the sky in bands of gold and rose, Jake sat quietly by Dakota's side, the barn and the fields spread before them. The ache of loss was still there, but it felt different, tempered by gratitude, by the lessons he'd learned about compassion and belonging. He realized that through Dakota, the whole town had started to heal. People talked more. Kids played in the streets again. Even old arguments seemed to dissolve, replaced by a sense of shared purpose. That night, as Jake settled Dakota into her stall, he whispered, "Thank you, girl. You saved more than just me." Dakota nuzzled his shoulder, and Jake knew he wasn't alone in that barn anymore. Not really, not ever again. Aspen Creek was still a small town in a wild world. But now, it was a place that remembered what mattered most, not being unafraid, but choosing courage anyway, not being perfect, but opening your heart again and again, no matter how many storms you'd survived. The story of Dakota and Jake, the broken Mustang and the grieving man, became a story the town would tell for generations. And in that story, every person found a little piece of their own hope, their own second chance, and a reason to believe in the healing power of trust. Dawn broke soft and golden over Aspen Creek, spilling warmth across the meadows and splashing color over the ranch that had once seemed frozen in sorrow. The old barn, battered by storms and time, glowed in the sunrise. On the hilltop, Dakota grazed peacefully, her brown coat shining, her belly now smaller, a newborn foal wobbling at her side. The foal, all legs and wonder, nuzzled its mother for reassurance, finding the world both strange and filled with promise. Jake stood by the split-rail fence, mug of coffee in hand, watching the scene unfold. For a long time, he simply breathed in the stillness. He thought about how far he and Dakota had come, how every hardship, every lonely night had led to this quiet, hopeful morning. The pain of Emily's loss was still there, a part of him that would never quite fade, but it was softened now, woven through with gratitude, like golden threads in a worn old blanket. He glanced down the slope where children's laughter rose up from the pasture. Word had spread quickly about the foal's arrival, and now the kids from town came to visit nearly every day. They pressed hands to the fence, whispering awe-filled greetings to the mare and her baby. Parents watched from a distance, some still remembering the days when suspicion and fear surrounded Dakota. But that was long past now. The Mustang was no longer a question mark on the town's conscience. She was its pride, its symbol of renewal. One morning, Jake found himself on the local radio, sitting across from a young interviewer whose face was all freckles and earnest curiosity. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "it's not every day a horse saves a ranch and brings a town together. What do you think Dakota's story really means?" Jake hesitated, thinking of all he'd learned. "I used to think strength meant not needing anyone," he said finally, voice thick with memory. "But this horse, she taught me the opposite. She showed me that being vulnerable, letting folks in, is the only way to heal. Redemption and belonging, those are choices. We make them every day with every act of kindness, no matter how small." The interviewer smiled. "And what about people who are scared to trust again?" Jake looked straight at the microphone as if seeing right through it, out into the homes and hearts of everyone listening. "Sometimes the ones who need us most are the ones who seem most afraid. If we show up with patience and keep showing up, the world can change, for them and for us. You just have to be willing to try again." That message, soft, simple, but profound, echoed around Aspen Creek. In the days that followed, townsfolk who had once stood on opposite sides of old arguments found themselves working together, fixing fences, organizing spring picnics, showing up for neighbors in ways both big and small. It wasn't just about Dakota anymore. It was about every wounded thing that had found its way to their door. every lonely heart, every wild hope that needed shelter and care. In the evenings, Jake walked the pasture as the sky blazed with the colors of dusk. Dakota and her foal trailed at his side, quiet as shadows. Sometimes Carla joined him, the two of them falling into an easy companionship, laughter and gentle words shared between sips of sweet tea. Sometimes it was Mrs. Avery, bringing stories and memories of the old days, or Tom, swapping tall tales and whittling little wooden horses for the children who flocked to the ranch. Dakota, once hunted and feared, now stood at the very center of it all. She was patient with the children, gentle with the elderly, fierce and protective with her foal. She had become more than a survivor. She was the anchor that held the community steady. Her story was retold at every birthday, every holiday, every long summer evening when families gathered and the air hummed with crickets and hope. Jake saw it too, in the way people treated each other. He saw second chances given freely, apologies made without pride, help offered without expectation. The legacy Dakota left wasn't just about courage in a storm. It was about the small daily heroism of kindness, loyalty, and the willingness to start over. As spring turned to summer and then to fall, life in Aspen Creek fell into a new rhythm. The foal grew strong and curious, chasing butterflies through wildflowers. Dakota, once so wary, would come to Jake's call and rest her head on his shoulder, eyes half closed, trusting as she'd never been before. Jake kept the barn doors open, letting in neighbors and strangers alike. The ranch became a gathering place, a quiet testament to the truth that healing is a journey best taken together. One afternoon, Jake found a letter tucked into the mailbox, scrawled in a child's hand. "Thank you for letting me meet Dakota," it read. "She makes me feel brave." Jake folded the note and tucked it into his shirt pocket, heart swelling with pride. He understood now. Every story, no matter how hard, held the seed of something good, if you let it grow. On the anniversary of Dakota's arrival, Jake organized a small gathering by the creek. Folks brought food, music, and laughter. The children made flower crowns for Dakota and her foal, parading them through the meadow as the whole town cheered. Jake spoke, not with the careful words of a man afraid to be seen, but with the confidence of someone who had survived the storm. "Dakota's story is our story," he said, voice carrying over the water. "We've all been lost, all been hurt. But if we hold on, to hope, to each other, there's nothing we can't survive. True heroism isn't loud or flashy. It's found in loyalty, in forgiveness, and in the quiet courage to try again." As the sun slipped behind the mountains, Jake and Dakota rode out together, the foal frisking beside them. The world felt wide open, the air sharp with promise. They had come through the worst and found each other on the other side, whole, changed, and forever part of something larger than themselves. In the years to come, the legend of the brown Mustang of Aspen Creek would grow, but those who were there never forgot the truth at its heart. That kindness, even in the smallest measure, can change lives. That the broken and the brave often share the same road, and that sometimes it's the wildest among us who show us the way home. Jake looked out over the hills, Dakota at his side, the foal safe between them. He smiled, letting the wind carry his words away, words meant for anyone still searching, still hoping, still believing in second chances. "Hold on," he whispered. "Keep going. You're not alone." And with that, their story continued, just as every story does, wherever hearts are open and kindness has a chance to take root.